Thank you again so much for being here today at the Roaring Fork Valley's inaugural Backcountry Symposium. Hope you've enjoyed it so far. It's been some great panel discussions and talks. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Greg Albrecht with Aspen Public Radio and part of the planning team that has produced today's event in collaboration with this remarkable space, TACAW. I want to take a minute to thank amazing individuals who took the time to help advise the station on production of this event, including Ted and Christy Mahan, Chris Davenport, Doug Stenslick, Brian Barker, Katie Ertl, Sam McBride, and Will Dolan. And now, welcome to our second panel of the day, Communication and Decision Making in the Backcountry. We're honored to be joined by NPR's Kirk Siegler, coming back to the Valley for us. Thank you, Kirk, to moderate a conversation with CAIC Deputy Director Brian Lazar, Aspen Expedition Internationally Certified Guide Amos Whiting, and AMGA Certified Splitboard Guide and ARI Instructor and Staff Member Sarah MacGregor, to discuss the natural tendencies that influence our decisions and risk tolerance and what important lessons have been learned from guides navigating the backcountry. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Okay, thanks everybody for joining us for this panel. I know it's really nice outside, and you may not be thinking about skiing, but it's never too early and to talk about backcountry skiing and safety. My name's Kirk Siegler. I'm a reporter for NPR. I cover the Western U.S. for NPR. I was briefly based here as a cub reporter back in the day, and I find myself back in the Valley a lot on assignments, particularly timed to storms. Conveniently. No. So anyway, so it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for joining us on this great day. We're going to start with maybe a quick little rapid fire down the row here. Give me a sense real quick, starting with Brian, your ideal and maybe one of your best days in the backcountry. Just a little icebreaker here.
Oh man, it's
before we talk about the tough stuff.
Well, I'm getting old, and I've been doing this long enough. Powder days are amazing, but powder days with people you love are the best. That's it.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of my time skiing is with clients, but my best times in the mountains are with my boys.
My favorite times in the mountains are with my partner, Austin, who's in the audience here. But I also lead a lot of women's programming, and I have a lot of fun. I'm not going to bring in gender quite yet. I don't have a lot to say about any sort of negative impacts of gender in the backcountry. However, I can say that the giggles and natural interactions that come forth with women's programming is unequivocal.
Okay, so storm chasing is one of my favorite things. I said sometimes some of my friends can tell that sometimes I've picked an assignment that happens to be within close proximity to Utah when there's a storm. So anyway, let's talk about this valley and why we're here, and we're talking about backcountry safety and some of the factors that go into decision making. We talked a little bit leading into this panel. I know you guys weren't here. But one thing that caught my interest was, I think we think about, we think about backcountry safety and we just automatically think about avalanches and snow conditions. But also, one of the biggest factors that lead to problems in the backcountry is us. It's the humans. Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, you're right on the front lines as someone who's an avalanche forecaster, one of the most foremost in the state, but what is it about the human element that can cause backcountry problems?
Yeah, and I've seen this evolution, and particularly how we kind of teach and approach avalanches over the decades. You know, when I first got into this business, we really thought like a better understanding of avalanche science and fracture mechanics and all that stuff would help people stay safer. And to some degree, that's still true. You do need a basic understanding of just the avalanche phenomenon all by itself, but avalanche conditions are just a static environmental thing, like the weather. And so whether you get into Mother Nature doesn't care what your goals are for the day or anything like that. And if you don't play by her rules, that's when people get into trouble. And so it's matching, objectives to Mother Nature's conditions, which is what keeps people safe. And, going into the backcountry, I've had to do way too many of these accident investigations over the years where you both, are talking to survivors in the wake of fatal or near fatal avalanche accidents. And you can see the pattern is it's rarely people making one giant mistake that got them into trouble. It's a series of small decision-making errors that often come out of our human frailties, where human beings, we make emotional decisions when slopes look good or conditions look good, or they look bad and you're just trying to beat the weather and get the hell out of there. We're prone to making small errors in our judgment, and if you make a couple of those or a few of those throughout the course of the day, they stack up. And so that's where all of this discussion around the human factor has bled into, avalanche education over the years, which is a good thing. But we can't just describe this as a list of heuristic traps and then leave it at that. We need plans to mitigate our own human frailties, and I'm glad to see that approach evolving over the years. I think that has the greater potential for keeping people safe in the backcountry than nailing fracture mechanics with computer models. Although we're going to do that too.
I would love to chime in with a quote that I really like from Roger Atkins. He says, "Staying alive in avalanche terrain probably has more to do with mastering yourself than mastering any knowledge of avalanches." And I would wholeheartedly agree with that. The statistic from years ago that brought up this topic is that 90% of avalanches ending in a fatality were triggered by someone in the party or the victim themselves. And Brian and I had discussed before this panel that that statistic is shifting now that there are more users coming into the backcountry. Now we're seeing more and more triggers occurring from other users nearby. But it really is a human problem more than an avalanche problem.
Right, and Amos, if you want to chime in, I mean, it's really remarkable to think about because we do sort of still, and I understand the numbers changing a little bit, but that the fact that it is so often a human causing something or a human in a nearby party causing the accident does make us think that it's quite preventable potentially.
Absolutely. There's always a reason to go. We all want to ski the powder or ski the big line, and the reasons not to go are the harder ones to swallow or the harder ones to agree on or to communicate within your group. And it for sure. I mean, you think of, especially in a place like this where we're often dealing with just a very unstable snowpack. There's so much white untracked out there to go ski, and we all want to ski it. And when and how and why, not why, but when and how, and that's the crux.
You talked about the numbers may be changing as more and more people are in the backcountry. Is that something you guys are seeing as guides every day? I think there was well-publicized attention, and it's something that we've covered quite a bit, the pressures on public lands, particularly in the backcountry. But you're seeing more and more people out right now. Do you want to talk about some of that and some of the challenges that may or may not bring? On one sense, it's great, right? We're getting more people out there. Or is it?
Absolutely. I can start with some data that I know firsthand working in the area office, that during 2020, the pandemic, numbers skyrocketed in the way of number of students attending courses. And it's slowly been descending since COVID, but that's just helps us understand that there are a lot more people out there. There are a lot more people now educated with the equipment to get out there. And I think that I have noticed it as a guide and a recreational user, especially also with more and more guidebooks becoming more prominent. People now have the resources they need to get out there, and I think that more and more folks are pushing deeper, and they're choosing perhaps to take more risks because of the presence of people. Ian McCammon talks about social facilitation as one of the heuristics, the human factors that can lead to compromised decision making. And what that means is a behavior is correct to the extent that someone else is also present. And that is skyrocketing because there are more people in the backcountry, so we're more and more influenced by the presence of other people out there. And if we want to take it a step further, the presence of people in the world is now becoming closer through social media.
So, Brian, also maybe to dovetail on that, I recall, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know a couple of years or pretty early on into the pandemic, so a couple of years ago now. Does everybody remember the pandemic? No. The Colorado Avalanche Information Center put out some sort of public awareness campaign about this very fact that Sarah's talking about. That is, when all of a sudden there were all these people at our favorite trailheads and bowls and lines, some of the experts or the more experienced, and I'd be interested in all of your guys' take on this, the more experienced then started pushing themselves to go farther out and potentially into more dangerous territory and making decisions they may not otherwise or might not have otherwise made.
Yeah, I mean, COVID was a scary time when it first hit for a bunch of reasons. The spike in, all the ski areas closed. The spike in sales for backcountry gear alone is probably what propelled Cripple Creek all by itself into the juggernaut it is. And the problem was, people really they wanted to still be on snow. It was March and conditions were good. And so they went and bought gear. And I was seeing the most amazing kind of things going on in the backcountry where people were showing up in parking lots, ripping tags off their brand new ski gear and going into the backcountry with their kids, in some cases, with absolutely no idea of the hazard that they were taking on, right? They saw other people there, and so those of us who've been out there for a number of years were like, I gotta get as far away from this as possible. This is terrifying. And so yes, people started to push deeper and further to get away from the chaos that was going on closer to the trailheads. That has ameliorated a little bit, as Sarah pointed out, since COVID, but I don't think we're ever going back. COVID, I think, probably just turbocharged a change in the demographic of the people we see out there that had been a long time coming, and it just, essentially poured gasoline on the fire. So, when I first started getting into this in the very late 80s and early 90s, the number of people out there were few and far between. Even at really popular places, you pretty much knew everyone who was out there. The barrier to entry was much higher. The gear was not what it is now. You were on 210 length skis that were 80 underfoot. Most of us were traveling around in leather boots because that was the most efficient way to get around. And you had to be a really good skier. And then came fat skis and AT gear, and you didn't. You could be an okay skier and get around in the backcountry. And you used to be able to have to read a map and navigate in a storm with a compass, and you don't have to do that anymore. And you can see people walking around following the blue dot on their phone. They've got guidebooks now that they can just follow GPS tracks. And that's not to say this is all bad, but it has certainly changed the demographic of the people that are recreating out there, and now there's way more people. And so when Amos and I first started skiing, it was if you could manage your group and manage yourself, you could pretty much stay out of avalanches. You didn't have to worry about anything else around you. It was like who the people you were with. And that's not true anymore. There's an increasing frequency of avalanches being triggered onto groups from people outside, from other groups. And that's just a new danger we've got to consider while moving around in the backcountry, is that you have to be aware of other people around you. And I didn't really think about that until I had to, in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think seeing the growth off the ski areas, a lot of our guiding and our business is based on lift access backcountry off any one of the 4 ski areas up in the Upper Valley, as well as in the Western Elks and the Marble Zone. And the growth and the increase in traffic in the backcountry has been exponential. So powder skiing, it's this finite thing, right? For untracked snow, it's only there for a short period of time, and then it goes away. And so the hunger, it's as strong as ever, and people are fitter, gear is lighter, and now it's a scarcity issue. So people are taking greater risks to get that. And as a guide service, part of what we're doing is we're providing a lot of it's avalanche education, so more of the focus is on educating people, but we have plenty of people that we're just they want to go ski for snow. And same thing, even as guides, we're now having to look further to find the untracked or find our little stashes. And that pressure for that finite resource is definitely a source of potential poor decision making, I think, for all users, right? It's like, okay, we got to hustle and get on top because this crew's right behind us, or they're coming up from another ridge and they're going to get there, or we're going to rip our skins and just ski this instead of like doing a ski cut or digging or whatever we might do to slow down the process, because I see that group up above. They're not going to stop and do the same homework we're going to do, but I want to make sure that we're getting that fresh tracks. And so that finite resource, especially closer to ski areas or in popular zones, is creating more and more aggressive behavior.
Yeah, I think bringing it around full circle to like the human side of this and what we can do about it. I think to start, we have to be aware that it has been well documented and well researched that humans make poor decisions when they see that their line might be compromised, or when they're standing on top of a slope that just looks super beautiful. I am vulnerable to that, and I tell all my partners that before a day of skiing. Like, listen, everything I know about avalanche education like goes completely out the window when I'm standing at the top of my line and when it looks pretty and I want to go get it. And I think it's really important to communicate that to your partners. But I think also it is okay to ski a tracked slope if deviating from your plan is riskier. And I think this goes back to like the plan and prepare side of things. You can avoid a lot of mistakes if you just do a really good job in the preparation side of things. And this can be like pre-season, where you're spending a lot of time like learning how to use mapping tools, learning how to plan a good tour, and when you're spending time working on your fitness, training, using your skills. And this can also be pre-trip, right? Doing a good job of expressing your goals, your abilities, your vulnerabilities, and your risk tolerances to your avalanche partner, so that once you're in the backcountry, you can default back to these decisions that you made when your brain was in a less stressed space, and you're less likely to make on-the-fly decisions that could end poorly. I do want to talk a little bit too about just like professionally, there is a pressure as a guide, right? We have to deliver. That's what we're getting paid for. And when there are people out there, I've definitely found myself, feeling that pressure to deliver and maybe take greater risks than necessary. And it's a constant practice to stay in tune with staying in a safe place.
Yeah, let's dig a little bit deeper into that for the guides particularly. I mean, we're talking about how it is not the 80s and 90s anymore. It is not just a niche group of folks in leather telly boots. There is kind of, and not just in backcountry skiing, throughout society now, everybody kind of feels like they're an expert in everything because they have computers in their pockets. I wonder, do you guys face even more pressure with that, with some of your clients saying like, no, we can go down here because I'm an expert, I know this, and like, is there more pressure? How do you navigate that? And does that come up often now these days in the field, especially as you describe a scene where we're watching another group, another company kind of on the next bowl over getting the goods maybe first before your group, and everybody's like, well, I paid hundreds of dollars for this.
Yeah, so early, when I first moved to Aspen, Dick Jackson, who's here, one of my mentors and founder of Aspen Expeditions, I was out often by myself. We didn't really have much of a guide team, and I would sort of like report back to Dick. And I had a couple days when I'd be out, and I would do these pretty big days deep in the mountains with like one client. And I had some pull that I had to provide this ultimate product. And Dick reminded me, hey, like, you don't need to go that big. Like, they're going to be okay with less, still giving them that great experience, but as long as they're coming home to their family, they don't have to come back as late. And it was a bit of for me, the younger, aggressive guy, like wanting to prove myself, wanting to get out there. And then now, as I now mentor guides and have taught guides, that's part of the lessons I'm still teaching, but we all still fall guilty of that, but there's that trap of wanting to provide that product. And yeah, for sure, like if we're skiing, people ski aggressive lines. Let's take some of our local bigger terrain. So like Highlands Ridge, which is it's the biggest lift access terrain that we have in our valley, some of the biggest in the state. And you go one step out of a ski area and you're into 4,000-foot runs. And last year was a kind of an atypical year where people were hardly out there, but there's some years where there's an amazing amount of traffic and huge aggressive lines, and we're walking with our clients past all sorts of untracked snow to find the safer line, or the more conservative, we'll say, instead of safer. And we do get that pressure, and that's part of the training that we try to go with, is just be like, hey, look, like, yeah, they're doing that. That doesn't mean that we're comfortable with that, and you're paying us so that we can help make the best decisions that we can to keep you safe and keep you coming home, number one. But that pressure, again, it's back to like the scarcity thing. So the scarcity and then client pressure, and yeah, and as things go up and people pay a lot of money to go on these trips, and they maybe are planning them for years, or maybe it's a trip across the world and you're skiing in another continent. And it's like, I came all the way here. It's like, well, sorry, we have to ski this low angle stuff right now. And that's a hard call, but that's why we make the medium bucks.
Yeah, Sarah's response kind of triggered something for me, and it's that, and Amos just touched on it, but like there's all kinds of things going on in the backcountry that are going to tap into our emotions and can lead us astray. And so from a personal risk management perspective, like a strategy which is not new by me by any stretch, but has been effective, is, to touch on Sarah's planning thing, is you need to make a plan appropriate for the conditions, and I will rule out terrain from the comfort of my living room with whoever I'm going with. And we decide where we're going, but more importantly, we decide where we are not going the night before, the day before we go out into the field. So we have red lighted a bunch of terrain. And my rule in any group I'm with is we cannot change that red light in the field. Absolutely not. Which means I may miss out on some really safe, awesome runs. But I am still here and still doing it, because I'd rather miss some good runs and some good terrain and rely on the decision-making I could make without those emotional pressures. And I think that might be a piece of advice I would share with the audience, is like, just decide where you're not going for the day and no red lighting terrain or green lighting terrain in the field. You can red light terrain in the field, but not green light. And that's been an effective strategy for keeping me safe.
I would love to survey the audience real quick. Please raise your hand if you have avalanche education of any kind. Awesome. So I see a good majority of the hands raised in the crowd. And so please, of those people, raise your hand if you regularly do a pre-trip plan with your backcountry partners. Okay, so I see maybe a third or a quarter of those hands are now raised. And this supports my own anecdotal experience with students of mine, where we teach in avalanche education that you're supposed to do this pre-trip process, and this is how you avoid falling into human traps, right? And as soon as you leave the course, that kind of starts going out the window, and it just highlights, like, it is so important to do this. So has anybody ever read the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow? Okay, cool. Couple hands. So what he talks about, it is one side of, it's only one opinion, but the idea is that when you are less exposed to stress and thinking slow, you make less error-prone decisions. And when you are thinking fast, you are more prone to making errors. Like I said, this is just one opinion by Daniel Kahneman, but the idea is that when you are sitting at home, drinking your coffee, checking the forecast, looking at past observations, and closing terrain, you're in a better mindset. And then once you get out into the field, there are so many stressors that come up that can cause us to default back into our fast thinking, which is kind of like our survival thinking. It's where we spend, neuroscientists believe that we spend about 90% of our brains in this fast thinking mindset, this shortcut thinking. And so if we can practice like we fight, that's one thing Amos has taught me. I've been a guide for him for a long time. If we practice like we fight, which means if we make these good decisions when we're in a good mindset, then we're more likely to access that part of our brain when we're thinking fast and more exposed to the stressors of our environment.
Okay, so, but to think of like a human analogy here, we've got our pre-trip plan, we've sort of decided where we're not going to go. We get out there, and in all the areas that we are going to go are all sun-cooked. And people are saying, well, maybe we should go over to the north-facing aspect. You know, I mean, these are all very real challenges you all face. Or you're standing on top of the cornice and you're planning on skiing the safer zone, but you look down and there's 6 of you standing up there and no one says anything, right? These are, and then you go, and then you get into problems. These are hard to plan for when you're sitting around having the coffee because you're not actually out there yet, right?
Yeah, I mean, just to come back, the pre-planning is critical. In the guide world, we decide the evening before, but always confirm the morning of, whether it's an in-person meeting or a Zoom or something like that, the closed terrain. Like Brian was saying, you can never open anything in the field that wasn't already open, but you can close anything from there. And so that's, I think, going forward for any party, that's critical. And for us, that's like our safeguard. Like and it's not to say you don't still get caught off guard by something that you had open, but if you just make that solid, like we're not going onto the powder snow because that's where the instability lies ahead of time. But yeah, I mean, as far as like once you get there, it's more about that connection within your group and the ability to communicate and actually like look each other in the eyes and really talk about things. Like if you're not hard closing something, what are your methods? Why would you consider that being yellow? And so instead of just, yeah, it looks sick and there's 2 tracks in it, like, of course, that's a good reason to go ski, right?
Oh, yeah,
Avalanches never happen where there's tracks.
I was referring to the notorious, well, in some form, it could be almost any accident, but a notorious accident in Stevens Pass, Washington, where somebody didn't speak up. Brian.
Yeah, I mean, the whole speaking up in the group, one, I would say the whole closing terrain can sound way more limiting than it is. Like, you have to remember, there are vast acres of terrain that are not avalanche terrain. Like, you can move around and have so much fun in the backcountry and completely avoid avalanche terrain. So you're closing very specific things, which leaves tons and tons of stuff open. So if you need to move from a sun-cupped slope to a colder aspect, most trip plans will allow for that because you can always use lower angle terrain. And in terms of the group dynamic, I mean, the communication bit is really, it's incredibly key and critical, which is why you need to choose who you're going out into the backcountry with quite carefully because it's not that they might be called upon to provide a rescue if all goes to hell, but like you need to have a shared model of like risk acceptance and communication, and you have to recognize your own pitfalls within your group. Like for me, for example, you know, I keep doing this, and because of my job, my personal pitfall is too much deference. And so if people are like, they're not going to question me, and I know that is going to get me into trouble. So anyone I go, except for my wife, who will question me nonstop, which has been great and kept me safe. And I've got some really good stories about her questioning a whole group of like avalanche professionals and IFMG guys in a trip whom she was absolutely right. And this has happened more than once. But so in my group, because I recognize this as my own risk, that people are too deferential, that everyone must speak up. Everyone must offer an opinion. And I don't care how many days you've been out there. And if you just say, I don't know, but I don't like this, good enough for me. I don't need an explanation for why you don't want to go onto a slope. If you don't like the feeling of it, the whole group goes somewhere else. And that's just how I operate.
Sarah MacGregor, what about trust? You're one of a few female guides, right, in a male-dominated sport. How do you navigate and see that playing out in the day-to-day amongst clients as a woman?
So I haven't been very affected by gender dynamics myself, besides kind of what I've already talked about. But as far as trust, like when I was a younger guide, clients didn't trust me as much. And I really had to start taking agency in my voice and speaking articulately and referencing direct like learnings from trainings and maybe even like quoting male guides before men clients would trust me and my decision making. So I had to kind of work through that. I would like to kind of take it back around to expert halo a little bit and like group communication. I had something that inspired me with what Brian said, but with expert halo, like I think it can be a woman perspective often to defer to men. And I'm not saying that this is all women because I can only speak for myself, but I have found myself, you know, looking to the more experienced people and the louder voices in my group when I had less experience. And what I'm learning now is that the least experienced person in the group has the most powerful ability to point out blind spots by asking very simple, basic questions like, would you mind helping me understand the decision-making that went into you choosing that this line was okay for us today? Like, a super simple question, like, why is this okay, can help the more experienced folks really take a step back to be like, well, yeah, why is this okay? I think that the more experience that you have, you're way more easily, I guess, confident in your decisions, and maybe you don't take a step back as much. And so this is my invitation for anyone else who ever goes into the backcountry with more experienced people to speak up, because your voice has a much better ability to point out blind spots than maybe somebody who is more experienced. And then vice versa. If you are more experienced, it is so important for you to elevate the voices of the least experienced.
I just want to second that. Like, forcing anyone in your group to explain themselves goes a real long way. And like I said, you know, I've had my wife being like, you said that was unreasonable. Why is this okay? And I have then found myself tying myself up in verbal knots to try and justify my decision making, and been like, oh, hell with it. Like, you're right. Why don't we just go over there? I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm glad you're here. That's why we ski together. So, like, everyone should be asking these very simple questions. Why is this okay?
Coming back to the pre-trip planning, right? So I was thinking, we're all in I suspect this is mostly a local audience, so can we zero in on the Roaring Fork Valley in particular and the mountains around here? You guys are talking about making good decisions, smart decisions, and low aspect, but what about in a place like this, not to be the whataboutism guy, but there isn't a lot of low aspect terrain around here, right? And what makes this valley such a beacon for, you know, extreme skiing and backcountry skiing? It's a pretty simplistic question, but also at the same time, a pretty dangerous place.
So we know that the majority of avalanche fatalities happen in Colorado. And if we narrow in on county, the majority of fatalities happen right here in Pitkin County. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Colorado on the whole, as many in this room know, has a very weak snowpack. And the reason is because we have shallow snow. We don't get a lot of snow, and it comes in dry. So it doesn't bond well, and it wants to avalanche more. And I believe that the reason that Pitkin County in particular has the highest number of avalanche fatalities of all counties within the state is because access to terrain is very easy, but access to simple low-angle terrain is harder to come by. And I would love to hear thoughts from the locals here as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, back to the ski area access, and not to pointy fingers. It's an amazing access that we have. This incredible resource that years ago the ski area, Aspen ski area, ski company created an open boundary policy, which has provided a tremendous amount of access and experience for people. But you can step off a lift and be on top of a huge, huge avalanche path without walking at all, on literally all 4 of the Aspen ski mountains. And so I would agree on that. There's really good access to tons of terrain, and not tons of it is lower angle. It's a bit more work to get to lower angle, or that lower angle gets skied out sooner. And it's a world-class ski resort, right? There's really good skiers and really good athletes. I mean, we've got some of the best athletes in the world that have come out of here. And so people are getting out. So I would agree that it's not that our snowpack is any weaker than any other part of the state. I mean, maybe it is compared to certain parts, but in general, I'd say it's the access and the ability. And historically, often what happens with avalanche accidents is the ability outweighs the education, right? So the skier skill set, the fitness, the desire is outweighing the avalanche education or the communication skill set to be able to work within a group, and that seems to be the kind of the common factor.
Even today, sorry, real quick, even today with all of these tools at our disposal, all of the access to avalanche education, you're still seeing that this adage, the ability outweighing, kind of sad, sobering.
Yeah, I mean, athletic proficiency does not translate to avalanche safety proficiency. And so, and often there's a quite dramatic mismatch between the two. And that's something, we're striving to bridge the gap with through avalanche education, but, we'll never get there. It's like people sign up for avalanche courses, and, an avalanche level 1 intro to recreational avalanche, decision-making is a 3-day course, and it's too often that people show up, they'll do their 3-day course and be like, okay, I'm good. I got my avalanche 1. And this was like literally just creaking the door open for you to have the tools in your tool bag to go learn from other people and mentors. And that whole mentorship part is often missing. And this is when people really, can get themselves into trouble. And, to talk about like Pitt and County, I mean, it's awesome that the ski area has open boundaries. We're really fortunate. And I hope that never changes. It puts a lot of responsibility on us to be smart about it. And if you look at the bullseyes of where avalanche fatalities are in the state of Colorado, it is Pitkin County, which bleeds over into Gunnison County, because that includes some of the accidents that happen like in the upper Crystal River Valley and outside of Crested Butte. And the other main bullseye is Clear Creek, Summit County, like right in there, because they don't have the open access as much as we do from the ski areas, but you can drive to over 11,000 feet at these passes. And so it's all about access. If you make it really easy for people to get in avalanche terrain, you will see more avalanche accidents. And we've had people, killed in Clear Creek and Summit County within like a stone's throw of their car. You can literally step off the highway and be in avalanche terrain, and you can step right outside of the ski area boundary here and be in avalanche terrain. And so people need to realize this is a bright line. This isn't a transition from backcountry to controlled inside the ski area. It is black or white.
Right. We at NPR have covered this more and more recently, unfortunately, because of the proximity to large population bases to this very risky terrain, be it the Wasatch next to Salt Lake City or the Front Range, probably more closer to home here in Denver. Do you guys, have you heard of YouTube? I wondered, like, what are you experiencing, and what is social media? How is this driving even more risks? Like, I did my 3-day course, I'm good. I've been watching a lot of YouTube. I know what to do out there. Is that actually also, what is the role of that? It sounds like such a professorial question, but, how much is social media influencing or affecting poor decisions, would you say, even among us out in the woods? Who wants that one?
I mean, of course. I
Feels
mean,
so
social media I'd say it's kind of the main FOMO creator these days, right? And so it's for everybody. And yeah, oh, well, Betsy just skied this rad line. Like, I want to do that. Like, I'm a better rider than Betsy is. Like, I should be able to do that too. So, 100%. I mean, it's huge, and I think it's for all of us. It's for guides as well. We're seeing other people ski stuff. We're like, wow, people are actually getting away with that stuff right now. Should we start thinking about going out there? Because we often kind of let our joke is not joke, but one of our sayings is we'll let the public kind of push further out into the more aggressive terrain before we start going with guests. And we're like, oh, we start to see like bigger and bigger lines getting skied. It's like, oh wow, does that make sense for us to try to take guests there? I mean, social media is a huge driver of FOMO, which then drives potentially poor decisions.
Yeah, coming back to Ian McCammon's human factors, acceptance and social facilitation come up here, right? The need to feel accepted by your peers and social facilitation. A behavior is correct to the extent that someone else is also doing it or is also present. And it's pretty interesting that he published this paper 2 years before Facebook was created. And it is more accurate than ever now. And kind of taking it outside of the avalanche context, humans are social creatures, right? Humans have social aspirations that encourage us all to work harder, to become more successful. And with the high performance in others, like I said, regardless of the avalanche industry, when we see our peers performing highly, that sets a new standard for what is good enough for us. And this idea of wanting social status, it's kind of in our nature. Like, we're social creatures, right? But to achieve that social status, we are now incentivized. When we see people pushing limits and pushing boundaries, we are now incentivized to also do that to achieve social status. And it is pretty well documented. We will take more risk if we see other people doing it. Well, they're doing it and I trust them, then it must be safe, you know?
Everyone wants to be the best skier on the mountain.
Well, I've got a teenage daughter, so finding something positive to say about social media is quite hard for me. However, you know, to touch on Amos's point, what you see on social media, it's like you start to see people getting away with stuff. And, you know, I can sit back as an avalanche forecaster and these guys as guides, and people getting away with stuff does not mean they made good decisions. And that's hard to square those two things up. Like, people get away with crappy decisions in the backcountry all the time. And I had a mentor once when I was young and in this business. He's like, look, 3/4 of the slopes out there are safe 3/4 of the time. So, like, the odds are actually in your favor. Like, you could do no planning and just go out there and tromp around, and the odds are in your favor. You're going to come home. You're going to be okay. Are those odds good enough to risk your life with? I would suggest not, right? 3/4 of the slopes, 3/4 of the time is not good enough if you want to keep doing this for a long time. But when you see people getting away with things, it makes all of us question, like, is that reasonable? Should I be doing that? Should I be taking clients out there? That's another emotional, like, you know, monkey wrench to throw into the decision-making process, which can happen even in your planning days. Like, we know people went and skied the Five Fingers and got away with it. Should we be considering bringing clients out there? Should I be considering going skiing that tomorrow? That's really hard, particularly if you've got, you know, data suggesting no. We're in a low probability, high consequence kind of scenario. Yes, a bunch of people are going to get away with it, but someone's not, and I don't want to be that person. Now, I will put in one good plug for social media, is that in my business, it's all about gathering information and observations and crowdsourcing, and we get more information now because of the existence of social media than we ever used to in the past. And so if we can harness this idea of communication and community to our favor, it can, in that aspect at least, help promote public safety.
Okay, so I'm told we'll have a couple minutes for questions, but before we do that, we started off with an icebreaker. So I was thinking, Brian just mentioned people getting away with, you know, sort of crappy decisions all the time. I wondered, we're on stage with some of the most experienced guides in the state, the country, if not even the world. Might you share an experience that for you was a close call, or talk about a time that you still think back on? to this day to help kind of relate and inform that these are some of the most experienced people in the backcountry you may ever meet, but it's the backcountry. You can prepare for everything, and then it's always something that you wouldn't think of. I wondered if you might, if each of you might have a few in 30 seconds, 60 seconds, be able to talk about that.
I'm not going to share a close call, but I'm going to keep it light. One day I was out with my partner, and he left me in the dust on the skin track. That was the last day that he ever left me in the dust. Similar to Brian's wife, I said something. But I think it's really important to talk about pace, particularly in this valley. There are a lot of athletes in this valley. When you leave your partner behind on the skin track, you may as well be out there alone. You have now lost communication. And now your partner is behind you, athleting. I use that as a verb, trying to keep up with you. They're gassing themselves out. And when they are doing that, guess what they are not paying attention to anymore? They're no longer able to take in observations and communicate them to you. They're no longer able to see or perceive what's changing in the snowpack or changing in the conditions because their bandwidth is completely occupied by keeping up with you. So I joke that what I said to Austin was, super glad I took today off to ski alone. So, partners often will say, well, I had to go fast because I was cold. So I kindly asked him to let me set the skin track, and I asked him if he would put a puffy on and skin behind me so that we could ski together, and that was the last day that he ever set a skin track.
I've got a close call. Yeah. So I've for a bunch of my career, I've taught for the American Mountain Guide Association and examined new guides as well. And earlier in my career as that side, we were examining ski guides, and they were American guides, but we were in Canada. We had just shifted venues due to a temperature change. In this area, I'd never been. One of the candidates on the exam was getting an easy exam, and he wasn't that good. And so my co-examiner had said, hey, this guy needs a tough lead today. We started off with somebody else leading who got pretty difficult lead and ended up later costing him the exam. And so, this was a better guide than this other candidate. I was like, okay, well, then we need to go over here and try to get him a good lead so he can prove his stuff and whatnot. We're going up. It was a lot deeper. We're going basically up an apron into a small couloir. We hadn't closed that terrain for the day. It was a lot deeper than expected. So it's the candidate, myself, and then 3 other guide candidates. All these guides are already guiding, but they're looking for their highest certification. Nobody's speaking up. We're doing kick turns through thigh-deep snow, and then we go into booting up this couloir, and it's the guy's wallowing waist deep, and I'm right behind him. Eventually, I pulled the trigger. I said, okay, this is enough, and he didn't really get that hard of a lead besides just deep snow. And as we're transitioning, everybody's basically getting out of the booters, getting into their skis. A slough came, so a smaller avalanche came down and knocked a bunch of the gear off. It didn't end up bearing anybody, but we lost a little bit of gear. And had people been higher up, it maybe not likely to bury, but it could have injured people more. And it was just a total human factor. I was told by the senior examiner that I needed to push this guy. He got a light exam. I'm trying to uphold the standard for the U.S. mountain guiding. All the other people behind, he's doing what I tell him. I say jump, he says how high. The people behind are also not wanting to speak up because they're just trying to pass the exam as well. So it was this, it was a human factor and expert halo all wrapped up into one. So, in the end, it worked out okay. It was a lot of learning, but.
And this was how long ago?
I think that was 2011.
Okay, so quite a long time ago, and here you are off the cuff telling it like it was just yesterday, basically.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, mistakes. I made one, only one. No, they'll stick with you. I mean, I got caught in an avalanche right after I took my level 1 course. I was like 18 years old, and that was super formative. But in terms of close calls, what I've learned to pay attention to is if you trigger an avalanche and you have a close call, those are easy to identify and they're easy to debrief. And what I've started to reflect on more in the last decade or so is the close calls I've had where nothing happened. Like, I just went out and skied, and I probably made a bad choice, and nothing happened. That's a really hard thing to reflect on, which I think really emphasizes the importance of a quality debrief with your partners, because we all get away with bad decision-making, and realizing you had a close call, even though it was a total non-event, I think you can learn more from than waiting for an avalanche to happen.
Getting away with crappy decisions. People are getting away with those all the time, but it's that one moment, right?
Yeah, I mean, everyone drove on Highway 82 today. 75% of the people are texting while they're driving on that highway, and almost everyone got away with it, right? It happens all the time.
So we have just a couple of minutes for maybe 1 or 2 questions if there's somebody. Yeah, and speak up as loud as you can. I can repeat as needed.
Brian, I'm wondering, has CAIC ever considered going to school on the Colorado Department of Tourism in terms of how they're steering tourism marketing to lesser used spaces? In other words, could CAIC, I wonder if they could consider steering people to low-angle backcountry terrain or less trafficked backcountry terrain to allocate it around?
Could everybody hear that pretty well? Okay.
So we work, because it's another state agency, and so we work with them in providing basic avalanche awareness material. Essentially, when we have visitors and tourists come to the state of Colorado, we want them to know that avalanches are a natural hazard that they need to worry about. If you stay inside ski area boundaries, that risk is next to zero. If you go into the backcountry, avalanches are a very real thing, and we could provide general avalanche awareness, and we do that. And so you can find some basic awareness materials on the Tourism Board website, for example. Getting people to go other places is a really tough nut to crack, and outside of our purview, really. Like, you know, people want to come to these ski areas and these ski towns. It's hard to get someone who's got a trip, you know, planned to Aspen to go to Kremling. I mean, you know, it's just like it's not something we can do effectively anyway.
Ski Kremling. Any other questions? One back there.
Yeah, so I don't know, for those of us that are local, right back in 17, we had a bunch of fatalities on Capitol. I think it was 6 in 5 weeks, something like that. And then we did do a little bit of a kind of a push at that point. We created this little thing called Elk Mountain Safety Coalition. But I think that the summer stuff, specifically in the high alpine, when people get into trouble, which is typically related to, it all comes back to the same thing. It's the planning. It's the prior planning. It's instead of closing terrain, which you might close, it's coming up with a distinctive turnaround time, and the ability to bail, and the willingness to bail, and also the self-awareness on, like, do I have enough energy to get back down? I think that, and that goes back to the same thing, the social media. People are walking tightrope, walking across the knife edge. So you know, we see people up on Capitol Peak, you know, in the Crocs or sneakers these days with, like, a kayak helmet and like a fanny pack, or like somebody walking up a peak with just a jug of water and no backpack. It's all related to the same thing. It comes back to that prior planning and communicating with a team and sticking with your partners. And often what happens with people that are getting into trouble in the summertime is they split from partners and they go up on their own, or they just push too hard, and then they're too tired to make the right call coming back down. Things always look a little differently on the way down. So it's just like saving that extra, being, unlike the winter with skiing where we can just let them rip and we're down in a couple minutes, right? It can sometimes take longer to go down, especially if you're exhausted.
I think just to tag on to that, like, mapping skills and learning proper mapping skills are just as important in the winter as in the summer. And I think with a lot of beginners to just exploring the outdoors, they largely can often lack in that skill. I would love to give like one parting thought that's been on my mind. When I first started getting into the backcountry, I was fighting an uphill battle, and one being a woman in a dominated space by men, and two being a split boarder in a space where everybody was telling me that I should probably be skiing. And it took me a while to get the invite, and I think that one human factor that comes up a lot is this need to prove yourself to be accepted into the culture, because getting into the culture requires somebody to extend a hand, and because it's kind of like a closed-knit culture, right? And so my invitation for y'all, if we can help avoid someone feeling like they have to prove themselves or, ski a risky line just to post it on Colorado Backcountry Ski and Snowboard Facebook group, then we should extend an invite to them, and we should help people feel like they belong. And I'm not asking you to do that to everybody, but my invitation for y'all is reach out a hand and make someone feel like they belong.
Okay, I think that's a great place to end. We're out of time. I think our panelists will have a few minutes possibly out in the lobby, but a round of applause. I'd like to thank guides Amos Whiting and Sarah MacGregor and the Colorado Avalanche Information Center Deputy Director Brian Lazar.
Thank you all for being here, and thanks to our incredible panel. I just wanted to let you know that up next at 3:30, you can join us here at the stage for a spotlight talk with Brian Lazar, who's going to give us a 20-minute presentation, a TED Talk, if you will, on the basics of backcountry safety. So backcountry safety basics here at 3:30. And then you can join us at 4 o'clock for our keynote and culminating conversation, Lou Dawson in conversation with Chris Davenport. I also want to remind everybody that TACAW will be hosting Teton Gravity Research's film, TGR's film, Beyond the Fantasy, tonight at 6 o'clock. This event will be accompanied by an athlete Q&A and a whiskey tasting by Tin Cup. There will also be 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock matinees tomorrow. And tickets and more information for all those shows are available at the box office. Remember, Explore Booksellers is here with a selection of books we all recommended that they carry. So they're right here in the lobby selling. And of course, outside we have an amazing resource fair. And the weather is just, I'm so impressed and appreciative. Sarah had said, let's pray for bad weather, so you all would be in the room. So thank you again for being here. It's gorgeous outside. And those are all area organizations and businesses working in outdoor education and adventure. The slides out in the lobby have the full list, along with a thank you to the sponsors of this event. And a reminder, if you have not yet checked in at the box office, please do so by 3:45, because after registering for today's event and checking in, you will be entered into a giveaway raffle. All those giveaway items are on a table outside. There's nearly $10,000 worth of gear and equipment there that you all will be walking away with. And so we'll be pulling winners for that right at 4 o'clock. So thank you, go explore, and I'll see you back here at 3:30.